Thank you for not minding while I worked on that. I am taking a risk. My name is Sharon Eubank, and I'm so pleased to have been invited here. But last night, I decided to set aside my prepared remarks, and I hope that you will treat me as a friend, because I'm going to instead talk about it, maybe a personal meditation, because of something that's been on my mind this last week. And I also view this, my part in the discussion, as an extension of the two talks that we've heard before. Our friends here on the other side have laid a very good foundation for what I hope to talk about. And so I hope you'll indulge me as I maybe talk a little bit more personally than I had intended to in the beginning. I am not a scholar, and I have spent my life and my career mostly in the really miserable, dirty places of the world where, because of conflict and violence and law that's been brutally broken and religion that's been perverted and tolerance that's been shattered, people are in extremity. LDS Charities has worked for 30 years in some of these countries all over the world, and it is representative of many, many other faith-based charitable organizations that are out trying to alleviate suffering and do good work in the world, as the definition was given about moral value. My experiences over the years have given me the conviction that sustainable development, the topic today, is not transactional. It's not about sustainable projects and independent perpetuation. I believe from my own experience that lasting human development is born at the intersection of law and religious faith and tolerance. And so the topic of the session here today, and indeed the whole conference, is making me think about what does that mean in a practical application. Because the basic building block of those three things, of law, of religious faith, and of tolerance, is character, or moral excellence that you have given the definition of. And when I talk about my own personal definition of character, it is simply this: that a person is developed to care more or as much about another person's rights as they care about themselves. Now, this is the golden rule. It exists in every faith-based tradition. But as we nurture that kind of character of worrying about someone else's rights as much as I worry about myself, then we have the moral foundation for everything else, for economic stability, for development, for the eradication of poverty. I have just come this week from, in fact, yesterday I arrived from being in refugee camps in Iraq and Kurdistan. And they're different kinds of camps, and they've been pushed out in different ways. Syrians and Yazidis and Christians from Mosul and Sinjar. And the worst horrors of these people living in these very, very difficult situations is not that they've lost their homes or their livelihoods or their family members or their health, although those are suffocating and they're heartbreaking. The very worst thing that has happened to them is that they have been robbed of their choices, stripped of their opportunities to decide. They have lost their ability to protect and provide and to trust their neighbors. And the barbarism that created the conditions that they have fled not only degrades the perpetrator, but also the victim. And their character continues to degrade in those situations. So when we talk about sustainably developing them and moving them into better situations, we must address what has happened in their character before anything else can be addressed. What can possibly build character back up? Is it religion? My answer to that is no. But tolerant religion can. The kind of religion that is tolerant of other faiths and other beliefs, and this golden rule of, I am worried about your rights and opportunities as much as I'm worried about my own, is the only thing that can build up that kind of character. So I've come to my point, and the point is that the real long-term objective of aid and intervention is to build character. And I think this follows very much nicely along with my friend Mr. Resup's idea that you must take care of the most important piece, which is the spiritual and emotional and psychological richness that is in every single human being, and all other things serve that. At its core, sustainable development should be about rescuing the seed of what is finest down deep inside every single individual and giving it the opportunity to grow and to flower. And if we focus simply on infrastructure and food and sanitation and security and shelter, we're missing the complete heart of our existence. Small experiences with service, with tolerance, with forgiveness, with listening, these are so small we don't even write them down. They're almost throwaways, and yet these are the things that nurture character. And uncovering and protecting the inner richness of every human being is our reason for existence on the earth. And stronger character is the ultimate sustainability. Now, I've just written this down last night, so I'm asking you, and I hope that it's part of the discussion, can that actually be true? Ezra Taft Benson was the United States Secretary of Agriculture in the 1950s. He was also a very fine Mormon thinker and one of our presidents. And he said this using the Christian tradition as his reference, but I think it makes the point that's well made for us all. He says, God works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums. Christ would take the slums out of the people, and then they take themselves out of the slums. Let me give an example of this, and then I hope that you won't mind that I just show you a couple pictures. Sheikh Nahyan bin Mubarak Al Nahyan, who is the Minister of Culture, Youth, and Community Development in the United Arab Emirates, sent some representatives from his country to this summit last year in Brisbane, Australia. And to prepare the delegates that he was sending, he held a meeting ahead of time so that they could get to know each other and talk. And in that meeting, he said, our vision is a global vision. He's speaking of the United Arab Emirates. We want our global community to prosper, not perish. Our leadership knows that its true wealth is this and accepts the obligation to respect and understand the many different religious beliefs of the people living in our country. He's a very visionary leader. He selected among those representatives from the United Arab Emirates in Brisbane a man named Surinder Kandari and another man named Robert Bateman. Surinder represents the second largest Sikh community in the world. And President Robert Bateman is the leader of a collection of LDS congregations in the United Arab Emirates. And this is a story of these two men and what they did. This is Robert Bateman, and this is Surinder Singh. They sat at the conference just like you are doing. They sat next to each other, and they liked each other. They got to know each other quite well. When they went back, they sat on the plane by each other, and they had this kind of conversation to say, let's do something. We've thought about what happened at the conference. We've been energized by what it was. Let's do something together. And so they had a discussion about, well, the United Arab Emirates is a rich country, and what could we do there? But they began to consider the plight of the many workers that are in the United Arab Emirates, and that they don't fully participate in some of the opportunities there. And so as they talked about this and the situations that were there, they decided, let's not do something abroad. Let's do something in our own communities, and we will introduce our faith communities to each other while we work on this issue. The Sikh community has a langar, which is a meal, a vegetarian meal that they feed, and Mr. Surinder's congregation feeds 10,000 people every single week. Can you imagine the logistics of putting on this kind of a meal for 10,000 people weekly? This is their community. They have a vegetarian meal so that all people can participate in it, besides their dietary restrictions. And so these two men decided at the langar, which is part of the Diwali festival, that they would distribute gifts to these people, not because they need the gifts. The gifts were small things of rice and beans and toiletries and things like this, but as a mark of respect and also of hope, saying we want to get to know you better as people living in our community. And so the project began. First, they had to buy the supplies. And so this was interesting as they went out and bought supplies for this operation, 10,000. They went to United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and said, we need some space. And so they provided space in the warehouse. The LDS congregation had a conference of their single adults from all over the Middle East, and so they scheduled it for this very time. And so the people came together, and their job was to assemble these kits, these gifts that would be given away. And they invited the Sikh community to come as well. And so you see these pictures of these two groups that have never known each other, have never interacted in any way before, working together and getting to know each other. This happened last week. I happened to be with them. And then on the 13th, which is just 4 days ago, it was the festival. And these gifts were given out to the people who came, 10,000. And you can see on the faces some of what is happening here. I do not pretend that this project was about the gifts that were given to the migrant workers there. It was instead about taking the slums out of ourselves, our spiritual and our physical slums that exist in each one of us, not in poor countries or developing countries, as Dr. Marshall said, but us, ourselves. All of us here, we're educated, we're sitting in a conference of this type, but we still have our prejudices and we still have our flaws. And can we do something to build up our own characters and remove the flaws and the slums inside ourselves? Because we cannot work on the development of our communities until we do that work first. Sadly, 2 weeks ago, Dr. Robert Bateman was exercising at the gym and he passed away. He had a heart attack. And I've thought a lot about him. The Sikh community put up this banner that said, this project is in memory of him. And it was very touching what they did. Afterwards, they talked to us about, instead of doing what we did this year, let's move on to maybe teaching English or doing something as a community. We had such a good experience. I've thought a lot about Robert Bateman. The last weeks of his life were spent doing this kind of a project. It was not only transformational for him at the very end of his life, but for all of the people that he included in that. I've chosen this example because it's so ordinary. It's so pedestrian. It's good for us to be at the conference today, and we will be discussing things, we'll be challenged by each other, we'll have great conversations. But if we fail to do what Surrender and Robert did when they left, on November 25th, next week when you're home, if we don't do something for ourselves personally, not our institutions, but we ourselves, then everything is in vain. So I extend to you the challenge to look forward to meeting all of your friends and hearing all of the stories and being energized by something that you will take away from this conference, and then go back to your community and act. Because there is no sustainable development without the character, and we must start with ourselves and build up and eradicate the slums in our own places before we can do this work in the world. It isn't that religious faith can be a contributor. It is at the heart. There is no character development without religion. We are the only actor. And this is our time and our place to rise up and with the collective power of faith and tolerance and the rule of law, we can change what this world has become to something finer. Thank you very much.